Well, the station canopies are complete, so stay tuned and all will be revealed. Well, good afternoon everyone and welcome back to Piccadilly. Now you can see in front of you we've got the canopies as they were, well, not quite at the end of the last video, because what I've done is gone ahead and painted all these cowling parts now, and they're all glued on, and I've double checked whether the lights actually work or not. But that's pretty much what you saw. Okay, so there's two things that I've got going on at the moment, and that is to now start thinking about the supports that run along the top. Now, if I show you this one, hopefully you get the idea of what I'm talking about. These pieces here with the little lumpy bits on the top. Okay, and they are made up from these little 3D printed sections here. So all I'm doing then is obviously just gluing them on. I will run over the top with a little bit of Null Oil to give them a bit of definition, but that's pretty much it for that. So let's move on to the next thing. Next up, I'm starting to think about the covering that's going along here. Now, I might have mentioned in the last video about covering it with styrene or plastic card, the stuff you can buy from your model shop. Now, I didn't realise, but it actually comes in A3 sheets as well. So I was quite relieved really to be able to buy a big A3 sheet, and that covered certainly that whole one in its entirety, and then those two are in just a couple of pieces. So I've cut some plastic card at 19mm wide, because that's the width, and then I've just had to make a little offset piece to go on the other end. In fact, they've all got that, to be fair. I cut the one that fitted the full length. I cut it too short, so I thought it's just as easy to cut another bit. We all do it. But anyway, so what I'm doing now is, you'll probably notice I've got these lines. So I just measured off, I think it's 15mm, 12mm, whatever it was, I can't remember. Scored along with one pass of the scalpel and then one long pass down through the middle, and then using some Null Oil, and I will just show you this very briefly. So a quick dip into there, over the end, and then I'm going to scoosh it sideways. I don't necessarily want it to be ever so neat. I'm just literally just shoving it on side like that, and then sort of sideways, and it will just literally just find its own way. There are some quite deep stains on some of these, which I will put on, so I'm just going to blotch over the top of that just to soften that out a little bit, and I'll do that one at the same time whilst I'm here. Okay, that will just help to define those lines a little bit, and just give it a little bit more of an interesting look. So next, and pretty much the final stage of the build really, is the glazing. Now, that was a piece of glazing that was from the old one, and I mean, effectively I could sensibly get away with that, but it does feel a tad narrow. I'm going to make it 1mm bigger. They might thinking, well, that's not a lot, John, but I think that will be just enough to help me get that in the right place. Now, what I'm going to do is use a piece of laser acetate, because I used to have a laser printer, But the first stage is I want to just give it a bit of a sand. So there it is, as you can see. Now what I'm going to do is just a piece of, this is, I think it's 400, yeah, 400, P400 there, look. So all I'm going to do is just give it a wipe over across it like that. And that will help to simulate the rain coming down off it, because I'm going to cut it into lengths that way, so all these marks then will go across. Right, hopefully you can just about make out the piece of acetate that's on the top there. So that's obviously been sanded twice, cut to 15 millimeters. Previous one was 14, so that extra millimetre has just made all the difference in the world. So it's a case of now gluing it on. I mean, I am going to investigate the glues, but I'll probably end up using glue and glaze because it dries clear and it's good for this sort of thing, as opposed to the super glue, which will leave white marks. Right, welcome back. Now what I'm going to do now is score the edge of the glazing, because I have had to put a joint in, because you can see there's one piece there and that finishes just there. You might just be able to make that out. But what I do want to do then, if I score a line with the scalpel, then it's not so immediately obvious. So I'm going to use this tiny square that I made a while ago. I'm literally just going to scratch a line like that and then move to the next one, and so on. Okay, right, and really quickly then just going over with a little bit of the sepia wash just all over the whole thing, a bit like that, because these windows do seem to be a bit tinted. Now you'll notice that it's sort of cockling up a little bit there, but I'll keep going, because this will get down into the joints, and I'm going to use a tiny little bit of black in a minute as well. And then, like I said, you'll notice it's sort of shrinking back on itself. So I'm just going to, that's washing up liquid on there, so I'm just going to give it a bit of a wipe over. Yeah, it will go a bit bubbly, but it'll all settle down. So just to break the surface tension and just even that out a little bit. So I don't think it matters which green you're going to use. I'm only going to use a tiny little bit on this one, not much. Just here and there, just the odd little bit. Okay, the next stage on this is just to tone it back slightly, because it is gone a little bit on the dark side. So I'm going to use a slightly diluted version of isopropyl alcohol, and literally just back and forth over the whole lot. Just soften it. Right, welcome back. Now, just before I show you the final thing on the layout, somebody asked me in the comments last week just to go over the electrics again. So that's what I'll do, just using a screwdriver to point. So obviously you've got the base where you're going to put your LEDs. Now I've got 2 copper strips. These are self-adhesive strips on each side, and they run the full length of the piece, whatever it might be. If you've only got one bank of lights, you could probably just use a piece of wire, but because I got loads and I needed to keep it fairly flat without the bulk of the wire, that's why I chose to do this. So for 2 pieces of 6mm copper strip, this particular variety of LEDs comes in banks of 3. Now you can get some LEDs which are further apart, and there's only a certain number in a bank. Now, for example, this stuff, if you notice, you've got your cut lines there's a solder point there, and there's some pads obviously there and there. So that's the width you'd get. That's covered with this silicone. Now, if you're cutting it into small lengths, that's quite difficult to work with, because you've got to remove the silicone to be able to get to those contacts. They are covered in it as well, so you've got to remove the silicone. You can use the soldering iron to do that, but you need to obviously severely clean your tip afterwards because this dries as a gel. And I stick them so that they are all the same way round, so that if you notice we've got plus, 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 minus, 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 minus along each side. So obviously this strip would become the minus and this strip would become the plus. And then every single one of these all along that you stick on will be exactly the same. Okay, so then you'll notice that I've soldered across this joint here and across that joint there from the solder pads. There's another set of solder pads at that end, but what I will say is, and I've learnt, cut it as close as you can to the edge of the solder pads. I then solder 2 wires to those, and those would then carry off towards the transformer. Right, so this here is the LED strip that I've just put on, or just showed you, and these are the 2 contacts at the end, and you've got your red wire and your black wire. That then goes off to your transformer. Now, I've shown in many videos in the past, you can buy these from Amazon, variable voltage transformers, and they have a little dial, and you can take it down to 3 volt or up to 12 volt, and you can set it to wherever you want it to be, so that whole thing literally just turns. You can buy these LED strips with the transformer with it, and usually they come with a plug and a piece of wire at the end. Depending on the circumstances, you could still keep that plug if you really wanted to. But again, if you just cut it off and solder these wires to the end of the solder pads, then it should be absolutely fine. Just make sure that you solder the plus to the plus strip and the minus to the minus strip. If you're not sure which way round it should go, try it. It'll work one way and it won't work the other way. You won't damage it. It's just that these light emitting diodes, LEDs, only work with the wires in the correct orientation. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's all this? If you want to create or fit a switch, so all you do is literally go and it comes on and off, this is what you have to do. So instead of the wire going straight across and into the transformer, I've taken the wire from this side into the switch, and then from the other socket, the other plug in the switch goes back to this wire here. So there is a gap there, and obviously the switch then makes the contact, because basically that's all it's doing inside. Okay, now there are loads and loads of different types of switch, and I can't go through all of them. Clearly I'd be here all day, but many different types of switch. Now, I tend to use light switches, house light switches. Why? Because they're big and they're easy to see, they're very easy to operate, and if a visitor comes round, I say flick that switch just there and they're not going to get it wrong. It's, you know, that I can put a sticky label over the top just like that. You can get small rocker switches which you could cut into your control panel, cut a hole and then mount them in, and you have 6 pins on the back of that. 1 wire will go to the central pin, and you can make a link across if you want to, and the other wire would go to one of the outsides too. You do need to make sure that you buy an on-off type switch, and there's also toggle switches, which basically a type thing. Again, exactly the same type of wiring up. But if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. All right, let's go and look at the canopies on the layout. Well, there we go. There you can see the canopies in place and they are all wired up, and I'll show you that in a minute. So obviously the roof has now been all stained up according to the Google Maps pictures and Apple Maps, etc, etc. There was a few issues with the glazing. I did stick it with regular PVA and also glue and glaze, and it kept, some parts of it are stuck well, but other parts didn't stick quite so well. So you might find it sort of a little bit bubbly in places or a little bit flappy, but that's the way it is, I'm afraid. We've had some hot weather and plastic does tend to expand and contract even just a tiny little bit. And just to show you the other side, this bit here has now been replaced and just tidied up a little bit. Okay, let's have a look at it in the dark. So there we go, the platforms are now bathed in light, and I've also put some little people on there as well. But just to show you the whole station with all the lights on, I'm really pleased with the way that's turned out. I did put the lights through the potentiometer or the variable resistor just to tone them down a little bit. I'm not going to show you how I did that, but I've done that in the past. But anyway, you perhaps think that is the end of the video, but hold fire, there is something else. So what could it be? Let's have a think. I did promise. The car park is complete. So it's not completely authentic to the real thing, but it has to be some compromises. So maybe some slightly different bits, but we've got car parking bays down the side here, disabled car parking bays. Obviously we've got the bridge now glued into position, and I've made a new barrier going across, which is now in one piece, not falling apart. We've got the bays going around the corner just like that, so all on the bottom. These lines here are made from sticky vinyl, so you draw on the line on the board with a pencil and then very carefully cut a slither and then guide it on, pressing it on. I did use some spray glue just to help it stick initially, and then obviously varnish over the top. And then when I've done that, and then go around with some varying greys over the top and sort of merge it in a little bit. But again, I'm quite pleased with that. These are new barriers that have gone up, these barriers here. And there's a load more little bollards gone up over there. Now, there's a new little bit of back scene, if I bring you back. That is taken from Google Maps, and just you literally just get the camera as low as you possibly can. And you know, that's the building behind, which is very curved. I think it's a hotel, but again, I can't be sure. Somebody I'm sure will know. So just to give you some views down there. Like that. Sorry about the creaky floor, not a lot I can do about it, I'm afraid. And I'll station at night, and this area is no exception. And also this area down below has now got lights in it. Did that exactly the same as I did the LED strip. So there's some, you can see in there. I'll come around this bit. You can see the girders at the top there. And the bins in the background. I think as you come in the room, it sort of gives that sort of nice impression now. It's more complete. Whereas if that section at the bottom here was all in darkness, it would be kind of lost. So there's another little bit of wall there and there. We've got Ofsted here. I think Steve described it as rail house. I think that was what he said. there we go. So again, if I just bring you back now, you can see the whole station is not far off complete now. So what does need to happen? We're getting really close. The next thing, there's two main things that need to happen now, and that is these overhead gantries, the airline equipment and signals. And apart from the odd little fiddly little bit of detail, that is about it really. The station is so close to being finished. Anyway, I'll see you next time. You take care of yourself.